Hey everyone, and welcome to our very special podcast edition, talking about Marvel's Spider-Man for PS4. I almost said Spider-Man PS4, but I get in trouble because that's technically not the actual name of the game. So, so thanks for joining everyone. We're going to be doing our Spoilercast today, talking pretty much all about the game. So, just as your official spoiler warning, if you have not played through most of the main story of Marvel Spider-Man, this is the wrong podcast to listen to. So come back to it after you finish the main story of the game, and we'll talk about some side stuff as well. So joining me today, we have the amazing Joel Tavares.
Hey, everybody, what's going on?
We have the spectacular Steven Santana.
What up?
Also joining us, we have your friendly neighborhood Tomas Franzizi.
Hey everyone.
And what's another Spider-Man 29? And then you have me, your Ryan 2099. I know that's not the best one I could have picked, but it's the one I could think of off the top of my head for other Spider-Man comics. Anyway, so we're your panel today talking about Marvel Spider-Man. So let's kind of just go into the game because pretty much everyone on the DualShockers staff has been playing this game and finished it at this point. So what's everyone's sort of initial thoughts and reactions to Marvel Spider-Man, and did it live up to your expectations for the game? So Joel, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So, I thought it not only lived up to expectations. I think it actually exceeded some for at least for me. The swinging, obviously, I think that's a huge highlight. They nailed it, and I know we're going to go into detail with it, but yeah, it was, I think it had a long PR cycle, right, from reveal. I think we had like 2 years.
Well, I
and some
think it was
change.
E3 2016 was when they revealed it.
Yeah,
I think it was around
yeah,
then, so it's been over
yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, so we had a pretty long cycle from reveal to release. But honestly, Insomniac Games, hats off to that team because I came away very, very impressed. But I will say, I think like just as fans of video games, I think that we do give like a little like buffer point, maybe point and a half, for like comic titles. I think just because of the nostalgia factor and how near and dear like these characters are to
Mm-hmm.
us, but overall, yeah, I was just very pleased with what I played and how it all came out and came together.
Awesome. Yeah, and Steven, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. I find it a very solid game. I have like some very small minor issues with it, but
Mm-hmm.
overall, I really enjoyed playing it. It really didn't get tiresome as far as the open world until the very end when I was just chasing the platinum, because otherwise, it actually was surprising at how well it kind of balanced the variety and the amount of like side content that there is in that game to engage with.
Awesome. Yeah, and Tomas?
Yeah, like Steven said, I have a couple small problems with it, but I mean it's probably one of the best games I've played this year. Definitely top 3, but it's amazing that you can tell the developers were super passionate about the character and the world, and they took the best elements of like several different universes, put them all into one, and just even the writing and the structure, you could tell they really put in their research and like dedicated themselves to every part of it. And it's one of the first games in a while that I can play and feel like 10 minutes has passed when it's been an hour. So like, and it's been a while since like a game's been able to do that for me. So I really enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely like something that you touched on that I love about this game, and like I was pretty blown away by Spider-Man. Like I think it might be my favorite game of the year so far. I mean, we'll have to see what happens with Red Dead when that comes out, but Spider-Man's definitely going to be like toward the top of my sort of game of the year list. I loved the attention to detail and sort of the passion they put into making this character, and really it's like probably the best comic book game we've gotten since the Arkham games for Batman. And yeah, like you guys said, like there's like some small nitpicks I kind of have with some of the gameplay side of things mostly, but I think just the level of detail and attention and polish that Insomniac put into this game really kind of makes me overlook any of the small sort of nitpicks that I have with the game. So with that said, we'll kind of go now into the sort of gameplay and the those elements of the game before we get into the more story specific stuff. So just let's talk about sort of Spider-Man and how Insomniac sort of recreated his abilities, because he's a character that has a lot of really cool unique powers, like obviously swinging and stuff like that. So what did you guys think as far as this game making you feel like Spider-Man? So Joel, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, and that sense of like just that sense of like true freedom in the game, in the game's world. And you know what? Like one thing that I personally love about video games in general, is when they capture like New York City, and I think Spider-Man, as much as the stories about Spider-Man, Parker, his family, and his trials and tribulations, I think it's also about New York, and that's why I was a big fan of the Homecoming films, and like I feel like that's just like a big piece of it, and the way they captured that all together, that made the character come more to life. If that
Hmm.
makes sense. Even like reading like the character bios and finding out like I was reading all the character bios with my son because that's why I played through my oldest with Luke, and like it's like, oh, so and so's from Staten Island. He's like, Dad, that's where we live there, and like all those like cool like little connections. It just brought me closer to the game, and I felt it was like it was really like the experience that I had wanted. I love the way they captured the city. That meant that just made it that much better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
Truly
something.
feeling like Spider-Man, like say like neighborhood, like the neighborhood Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think because like Spider-Man is such like a relatable character because like he's not a billionaire, he's just kind of an average, sort of person that got put into an extraordinary situation, and that's something that I really love about this game and sort of what they captured is they made him feel like even the fact that like at one point in the story he can't pay his rent, like is just like the things that they made him so personable and relatable is really cool and a great part of what I think works so well with this game. Tomas, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just saying that the game did a great job of establishing its world through some of the side content as well. Like those backpacks you find,
Mm-hmm.
they add so much depth. Like when you just kind of find like electrician gloves, and he's like, "Oh, I used these the first time I fought Electro." Like just small things like that give the world. Because the game, I mean, we'll get into this later, but it's surprisingly reserved with like how it uses its characters and villains and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But through stuff like that, it really, when you go into it, it feels like a living world that's existed with other stuff in it, and even in like the bios and the side quests and the collectibles. Like the Insomniac just did a really good job of realizing the world.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, what's cool is that Tomas, he's bringing up the backpacks, right? And like just that one backpack in particular, because I remember picking it up. Um, I feel like the backpacks that like piece of it, they add to the game as you're playing it, but you can actually like leave those for the end, and I think you appreciate them more because like Spider-Man has like this banter with Electro and Rhino and all the guys that get out of the raft, right? And like they're going back and forth, and obviously there's history, and obviously if you're a Spider-Man fan, you know that there's history. But going back and like picking up the backpacks and like and adding that layer to it, I think it made it even that much better. And I don't know, that was just me with the whole backpack piece.
Yeah, and the backpacks were actually the first thing I did pretty much. Like right after I did like the first story mission or two, I just went around getting all the backpacks, and I thought that was really cool. How like they were like sort of the basic like collectibles that you'd find in most other games, but like they did have those nice little bits of story that sort of helped flesh out Spider-Man as a character, so they weren't just like go collect 50 random backpacks thrown around New York City. Um, so yeah, and then just another thing I think to touch on is the sort of the way that they integrated Spider-Man's abilities in the combat. What did you guys think sort of about how because the combat obviously is very similar to the Batman Arkham style of combat. So what did you guys think about that and how they integrated it into the game?
I thought it was good. It's honestly like I've seen it get a bit of flack from some people, but I think if you look at it just at a basic level, it isn't anything too impressive. But when you look at the amount of options you end up having, like especially once you've like maxed out everything with skill points, like there's just you can like jump off a wall into a guy and then like web the other one. Like there's so many different aspects you can do, and so like I'm the combat and animation teams like excelled in it because if you can look at it and just say like, oh, it's a generic action game, but if you go in and like take the time to learn everything you can do, you can do some like really awesome and stuff only Spider-Man could do.
Yeah, and as Joel put in our chat, he said gadgets were too much for my dad reflexes, and I said I think if there's something I think I would nitpick about Spider-Man is the fact that like I like the combat and I think it works pretty well, especially because I love the fact that Spider-Man is so mobile and he can close the gap between enemies really easily, which I think is great, especially for the amount of people that you're generally fighting at a time. I did feel like maybe there were a little bit too many options. Like I feel like it was just like I kind of used the same maneuvers over and over again, just because it was like a lot of the stuff was kind of complex and it was hard to remember like, oh, I can do this and that, and it was just maybe a little bit too much. Like
You know what I think would have made gadgets more fulfilling to use would have been, how like you bring up the gadgetry by holding L1,
right,
the
yeah.
gadget circle. It should have just been like hold L1, pick the gadget, and then he just throws it. Like I think there was that extra like hold L1, pick the gadget, hold L2, then talk. Like I thought that was like too much. I know
Yeah,
that
and
sounds crazy because there's so much going on. It should
yeah.
have just been like, let me just select it and like out of the animation, he should have just like said, you know what, here's a web bomb or whatever that
Yeah,
whatever you threw because I felt like it was too much.
I really didn't use the gadgets like at all, other than like the times the game specifically makes you use them in fights. But otherwise, it was mostly just kind of zipping around and punching people. And
The impact web's really helpful when you're doing the crimes and stuff, because that's one that, like, especially if you fully upgrade it, like, you can just it's really good to like web enemies to a wall.
Yeah, I feel like
the
the
easiest way to take
challenge,
them down.
the fighting challenges, like if you want to get 3 challenge tokens, you'd like need to learn how to use gadgets to do like quick takedowns. But I felt like it was like too much. Oh, like, it's just a little too much. I feel like the curve should have been there for like, if you wanted it to be that kind of intense. But that one piece of combat, 'cause everything else about the combat just felt so good, and then that one piece, I always felt like I was that was like the only like hesitation.
yeah,
Throughout the times that I was fighting.
and I think it's like the combat. The only other thing I didn't necessarily love was just that like I think it was just too easy for your fights to get very overwhelming between the amounts of enemies you have to fight at a time, especially when you start getting the enemies that have very specific ways to beat them. Like, I posted this in the chat last night when I was playing, but, like, I hated fighting those demon sword guys and whip guys because they just, like, they basically dodge all your attacks unless you either, like, you dodge their attack and then they have a weakness opening. But then when I would try to take them out, I would have guys shooting at me off screen, messing up my animation, and I couldn't take them out. So I think there were just, like, some times where the combat didn't quite flow as well as I hoped it would, but other than that, I overall I didn't mind it as much. Steven.
The only area
Sorry,
of combat that didn't work as well for me was the stealth. I felt like it kind of like it was good, but I just felt like it kind of pushed you into combat when you tried to do stealth. Like if you were in one of those like hideouts, like you could stealth the first one, but then I don't know if I was just messing up, but every time I'd like kill everybody in the first wave.
No, that was actually something that I noticed was that if you do the first wave and stealth all the guys, it automatically makes you fight all of them in just regular combat. And at first I thought I was doing something wrong, but it actually was just the game forcing you into combat, which I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of. But then again, there would be like 500 guys webbed around the building, so it probably wouldn't have made much sense either. Steven, did you have anything you wanted to add about just sort of the combat, what you thought?
I really enjoyed the combat. I liked that I was kind of using more combos and moves than I do in other sort of action adventure games that have, like a heavy sort of focus, like like the Devil May Cry games where, there's a very heavy focus on doing like specific combo moves and stuff like that. And I usually really stick with the basics, like God of War as well.
Right.
But in this game, I was really finding it fun to like memorize the different moves that you can do, whether it's uppercutting somebody and then webbing them and throwing them into somebody, or continuing like a combo, or going into like a web swing, and like all the different sort of variations you could take the simple punch and like kind of implement it in different ways. I really like that. I do think the gadgets were really underutilized and unnecessary for a majority of the game. Like Tomas said, the impact web, when you upgrade that to max, it is a really, really fun thing to use because you will hit somebody and they will go flying across the screen. And as soon as they hit something, they just get instantly webbed to it. And it's great because if you use that in coordination with one of the passive skills, that basically every time you do a finisher, it will reload one of your gadget, sort of like I guess inventory spots or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you have impact webs and you basically are finishing everybody with the impact webs, it's basically you'll impact them, web them up, and then get another one. So you never run out. Until of course you run into the sort of characters that will, I don't know. There's like a really weird way they play fast and loose because like the Sable guys sometimes will like be immune to the impact web or the other gadgets as well. And that was a little annoying because the Sable guys were really hard to fight as far as like the 4 different factions that they have. They were like the hardest and the most frustrating.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I really enjoyed the combat. I really liked the stealth when it wasn't like when it was very specifically like, hey, here is a scenario in a story sequence or a side mission sequence that is very much like, hey, if you want to stealth it, you can. I really enjoyed those sections, especially the ones with the challenge, because those I really enjoyed trying to get through it like just as quick as possible, just like either distracting somebody and then webbing them up and then using triangle to do like the instant pull and knock them out. That was really fun. And I liked the combat a lot. I don't think I ever really got tired of it until maybe the end. I think it was weird how like every time you would get into a crime, there would be like 10 people that would show up. Like whenever you would bust a drug thing, it would
Yeah.
be like, oh, here's 10 guys like drug handoff.
They just have like a clown car of like drug dealers like come out and just start pouring onto the streets like.
Yeah, it was really weird when that would happen. But otherwise, I like the combat throughout the game.
Yeah, I love when the guy got kidnapped and then he's like, "There's the people that did it," and you turn around and it's like 20 guys just standing there.
Yeah, and I think like Steven said, like I actually like the stealth sequences a lot. Like I think they make sense for Spider-Man just in the range of abilities that he has, but I did like them I think a bit more in like the sort of specific situations in the story where like especially like the Grand Central scene where he's like zipping around taking out all the guys before that was really awesome. Before we start getting into the characters and sort of the story specific stuff, one thing that I also love about this game is just the fact that there's so many different Spider-Man suits you can unlock and sort of and earn and wear. So quick question is, what was everyone's favorite suit that they wore through the game?
The vintage comic suit. That was the one. As soon as I unlocked that was the one I wore.
That was the one that I used for the whole game. Was I just used sort of the classic like blue and red suit.
Yeah, my eyes were set on the comic book one, like the cell shaded one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you don't get that until like the end of the game is the problem.
Dude, I like my son was loving like every suit. I think his favorite was the skull one. He's really into like dark things. I don't know if I have to watch out for that. But he was like huge into the skull one. But like I was like I just kept seeing people posting up those in that suit, and I was like, I need that suit. So we kept working. I think it was like level 41.
Yeah, I just unlocked it. I think it's like you basically get it toward the end of the game, which kind of sucks.
I know, and I loved that suit so much. But the Iron Spider suit was really, really dope.
Yeah, I used the Metal Spider suit for a little bit too. That's a cool one.
Yeah, and yeah, the Octo suit I think was really cool. Obviously, that's an end game suit. But go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I like the Scarlet Spider Ben Reilly one.
Yeah.
I liked the suits that were in the game. I was actually a bit disappointed because I felt like they went with a lot of variations of like metal.
Yeah,
suits.
that was kind of like when I started seeing people posting screenshots and stuff like that. Like I didn't know how many suits were actually in the game, so I was like, "Oh, this is cool. There's so many different suits." But like actually playing the game, like it's not a ton. There's like I don't know, 20, 25, something like that. And I was actually most disappointed that they didn't have the symbiote, the black suit. I was really looking forward to getting that one.
I understand that one because it's more story related, but I mean, like even I think Logan did an editorial on the suits he wanted to see in the game, and there were some like pretty iconic ones that didn't make it in. You know what I mean? Like,
I can understand.
Which I found
like,
a bit weird.
I can understand for story reasons not including it. I just think like it seemed like such an obvious one because it's like a really cool iconic suit for him, and I think if they were willing to put Spider-Punk in this game, I feel like they could have given us
we didn't have we didn't have Amazing Bagman.
No.
Yeah, that was the one I felt.
There were like 4 iterations on the like Iron Spider Mark 1, Mark 2.
I think there were too many of that type of suit, like those metallic-y looking
and then
ones,
the one that I thought was weird too is that they had like 2 Spider-Man 2099 suits. Like basically when they would repeat the same suit, like they were all like well designed and cool and had cool abilities, but I was just kind of like, did we need 2 Spider-Man 2099 suits when you could have put like something else in there?
Yeah. All right, cool. So with that, let's start kind of going into the more story-focused stuff. But let's start with the characters first. So obviously, if we're going to go into the characters, we need to talk about Peter Parker and sort of Spider-Man and the way that the game sort of portrays them as two... Like, obviously, they're the same person, but the way that the game sort of portrays them as 2 different characters. So what did you guys think about the way that Marvel Spider-Man depicts Peter Parker and Spider-Man as characters?
So good. It was just... They nailed the character. Like... I was just very impressed with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
the voice acting was great. And just his personality and like how he would interact with people and how nice he was. They really got the core of the character, and you could tell that like everybody on the writing team at Insomniac like loved the character and knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and especially because like the fact that this version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, like he's been Spider-Man for about 8 years or so.
Yeah.
So he has a little bit of history of the character. It's not like Homecoming or the previous Spider-Man movies where it's the origin story, like where he's kind of finding his footing as Spider-Man, and he's been in the part for a couple of years, and I think it was actually interesting, I think, to like be playing the game and sort of figure out his relationships with these other characters, like just from sort of the environmental and the storytelling of the game, and sort of how, finding out his relationship with Mary Jane and all these other characters. And I actually, like, even though like playing a Spider-Man is super awesome and fun just because of how cool character he is, like I actually the Peter Parker stuff I think was some of the strongest stuff in the game, where you sort of just focused on him and his relationships with these other characters.
Yeah, his relationship with Mary Jane, I think, was my favorite part, simply because it was very reminiscent of my own relationship with my girlfriend, where there were periods of time where it was kind of like a broken up, but we still want to be together sort of thing. And that was very much what the Mary Jane Peter Parker thing was. Like, they're broken up. Obviously, they're going to get together, but it is still fun to kind of watch them kind of have like that very, like, it's definitely like sexual tension there when he's at the house and they're at the apartment.
Yeah, I think some of the best we'll go into Mary Jane in a little bit, but I think some of the best scenes that I loved in this game were just sort of him like sort of figuring out what like Mary Jane's sort of like feelings for him, like the scene where he's texting her back and forth, and like he's misreading her text, she's misreading his, like all that type of stuff was really great. Sorry, go ahead, Steven.
Real quick, the only disappointing part about Peter was I did not like, I guess it kind of spills over into Spider-Man as well, but like the quips, I really didn't connect with a lot of them. I thought most of them were like, like this is fine. It's not really making me laugh.
Joel, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say but you mentioned that we're going to get into Mary Jane a little bit, but I think Peter's interactions with every character, I think, felt human, and it felt very genuine, and it felt, I felt like it sounds kind of crazy, but it just, if it wasn't a Spider-Man game and it didn't have this whole superhero aspect, I think Insomniac did a really good way of just making people's stories connect and align with one another, and you can see very clear motivations and just the way they interacted. I think it blurred the line of what video games can be in terms of just dialogue and just presentation and the way characters interact with one another. So I think they probably did like the best Peter Parker job that we've had in a video game, I think. I don't know. I think it was just really, really well presented all around, character wise. Probably definitely the best Peter that we had. But I did like that those gameplay sections that we had with the other characters as well, because I feel like that added a lot more weight and oomph to a lot of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'll move us into the next characters we'll talk about, which we'll start with Mary Jane, because like you said, like you do get to actually play as both Mary Jane and Miles Morales in a couple sections, and I think it's great because like you sort of get different perspectives of Peter Parker and Spider-Man as these other characters, aside from just playing as him and sort of seeing them through their eyes. So let's start with Mary Jane and sort of what you guys think about how they included her in this game, aside from being as both a playable character and as part of the story.
I thought she was great. Honestly, I thought her sections were one of the best. Like, just really like, not just her being like independent and not relying on Peter to come and like save the day, but just like she was I think she was a really strong character across the board, and you don't really see that too often in games. I think they really did a good job making her very much independent and a valuable piece of the entire like storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they made some pretty radical changes to her character, but I think they were all like well earned, and like it made sense for the story they were trying to tell. And
I like that she's not a model and she's a
definitely because she's usually like, I mean, I like Mary Jane, but she's usually a fairly one-note character. I know there's like exceptions and backstory and all that because like I've read the comics, but like just on a basic level, they really easily could have just like made her a damsel in distress model.
Yeah,
that's Spider-Man's ex-girlfriend, but instead they were like, oh no, she's just as proactive in stopping Martin Lee. And,
it was nice. I didn't enjoy her gameplay sections or Miles's really. I felt like they were very like, okay, sure, whatever. Like playing through this.
I agree with that. Like they weren't great. I think people are blowing how often they came up out of proportion. I think like I've seen a lot of people acting like it dragged down the whole game when I thought they were pretty short.
Yeah, I think they were fine. Like
the only I wish they were more like, I think I forgot where they were. I think it was in the train station. In that one where you're Mary Jane and you're telling Spider-Man to like take out guys, like that was probably the. I wished there were more sections like that.
Yeah,
I
that
like
was
that one.
in the Grand Central scene. That was I think I wish that was actually one of the few where I was like, okay, this is a really cool sort of unique way to integrate Mary Jane as a playable character, but also have Spider-Man in. Like I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and even though even though the section wasn't that great, the first time you got to control Miles, I like freaked out because I was like, they actually let you play as Miles, even though he's not Spider-Man. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was just I
But,
kind of nerded out in that
Yeah,
moment.
I think that's probably a good transition to talk about Miles, who actually has a pretty important role in the story, much more than I thought he would. Because I know they revealed, like I think last year, that he was going to be in the game, but I kind of thought it would be more of like a cameo sort of thing, where it would just be like, oh, he's like in the game, he'll show up once in a while. But he actually ends up having a pretty significant role in the story. So yeah, let's talk about Miles.
Yeah, so Miles was a great introduction. I really love that they brought him in. I just don't like. I was really disappointed with how they not like they implemented him, but what his presence afforded the game, which was basically, oh hey, like in the Ultimate Comics, Miles Morales takes over after Peter dies, and so
Right,
to have
yeah.
Miles Morales in this game, I was like, oh fuck, are they going to do something bold and like kill Peter? And because Peter's now vulnerable because Miles is there, and it's like, oh, well, he can take over at the end. It's like, okay, is Peter going to die at any point in this? And it was just like kind of like throwing it up into like, well, if Peter's going to die, like anybody can die because Peter's the main guy that you're playing as. And if he's vulnerable to death, then that kind of like puts me on edge as far as like anybody can be vulnerable to death.
Sure, yeah.
They don't follow through on
I
that.
thought we were gonna get George R. Martin hard for a second.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen. It's just like, oh, they just like they played it really safe with that, where it was like, oh fuck, like Miles is here, that means anybody can die. Like it is open to fucking like everybody's vulnerable. But then it's just like, oh no, Peter lives, Mary Jane lives, the most predictable character, like the most safe character dies. Which I mean, like it's an emotional thing. We'll get to that. But like it's
Yeah.
still, it's like who's the safest character we can kill off? Oh, we'll do that.
Yeah.
So it was just disappointing for me because I was like, oh fuck, Miles is in this. That means so much. They could do so many bold things with that because it makes that character vulnerable. Because otherwise, it's like, well, like obviously Spider-Man's not going to die.
Yeah,
He's fine.
one of my theories going into the game was actually like that he was dying, like because I thought that like the new suit would have something to do with that. So that was something I had in the back of my head. I mean, and I'm not one like I don't let my theories get in the way of like the actual story. I try not to, but like so I was glad he was there. I mean, he was a little like superfluous to the whole thing. Like he didn't really need to be there. Like you could take him out and like
I
not
like-
a ton would change. But
Yeah,
I like that. I mean, just like his dad was like you got a good sense of like where he came from and who he was. Once they introduced his dad, I was like, oh well, his dad's dead. Yeah,
he
but
might as well have
yeah,
been
but
he might as well have
what's
been
it-
wearing like a red uniform or a
Mhm.
red shirt, like.
But yeah,
See,
'cause-
I didn't know that Jefferson Davis was his dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. Like going
Okay.
in, but then I think once they got to like the honoring ceremony, I was like, oh, okay. So now,
Yeah, so-
now this makes sense why they highlighted this random at the time. I
Cop.
thought random cop, but it
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, no. But yeah, no. I think like because this wasn't an origin story for Peter, I actually think they made it an origin story for Miles, and so then hopefully in like a future game we could have like 2 Spider-Men that are playable.
Yeah, no,
So
I
I
think
think,
that's absolutely. I mean, and we'll talk about the post-credit scenes later, but like I think that's absolutely the direction that they're going to move in. Where
Yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah. So I think that's kind of part of the reason they put him in there because like if they do ever want to kill Peter later on, they have
They
another
can.
Spider-Man they can pull from. So
Yeah,
like he was kind of unnecessary, but like
I like that.
his
It was like
closure.
Peter was becoming his like
Yeah.
not even like father figure, but like big brother figure. You know, kind of like
Yeah.
him and Spider-Man at the same time are doing the same thing, where it's like kind of like, you know, teaching him how to protect himself, showing like being like, oh, like Miles, like he wants to help, like he feels that need that Peter does, like they share that same sort of
Yeah.
responsibility that if they're able to do something, then they should do something, and
Yeah.
so it was like a nice reflection on Peter as far as like him seeing a lot of himself in Miles, and then also Miles just being like, you know, he's not Peter, he's not Spider-Man, he's not able to do these things, but then he gets the same powers, and so that's what makes him a superhero.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think with Miles, the one thing is that like I had never really read a ton of Spider-Man comics. Like most of my knowledge of the character and everything comes from the movies. So I think getting acquainted with this character who like has such a prominent role in the more recent comics was a really enticing reason why I wanted to play this game, so I could kind of understand Miles more as a character. Yeah. So Tomas, you were gonna say something? Tomas?
Yeah, I was.
sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I like that scene when he met Spider-Man, like before they kind of teamed up later on, where he just like taught him how to punch. And like that was just a really great scene because
It was, yeah.
it showed how great Peter was. It just showed both of the characters at their best, I think, and kind of like, especially when you know what like comes in the future from that character.
Yeah.
It was a great moment.
So as Steven mentioned, there is a pretty big character death in here, which is Aunt May. But before her death, let's talk about her as a character and sort of how she's incorporated into the game.
She was fine. Like, she's very, she cares about the people. She'll do anything to help other people. She's Peter's moral compass, as she always is in every interpretation of the Spider-Man character.
Yeah, I mean, I think she followed pretty much in the sort of example that we saw from the first Spider-Man movies and Amazing Spider-Man, where they had more of a motherly, sort of caring, figure for Peter. We did unfortunately not get the hot version of Aunt May, Marissa Tomei from Homecoming, which I was disappointed in. But I think she was fine as a character. It was actually I had sort of a personal connection to her because like the actress kind of looked a lot like my late grandmother, so that was like an interesting thing for the story to kind of be seeing her and like this role, and she reminded me a lot of my grandmother a bit.
Yeah, that same thing for me is my relationship with my grandmother is very much reminiscent of Peter's relationship with Aunt May, where she is like, the older motherly caring figure, but they also are, they enjoy being around each other. They enjoy hanging out with each other. And that's like me and my grandmother, we enjoy hanging out with each other. And like, one of the tough parts about moving away was like knowing that she's going to be so heartbroken that she can't like hang out with me.
Yeah.
And I think, and I know her role isn't like, until her death isn't like huge in the game, but I also think you also look at it as like this takes place like after he's been Spider-Man for 8 years, so at that point like he is like, you see, like he tries to stay kind of separate and keep like Spider-Man out of her life, even though she ends up knowing. But yeah, so I think at the point she is, but they do show that like when he gets kicked out of his apartment and he's able to go there, and she's like, "Oh, sleep on my couch." It just, they did a good job at showing who she cared and who she was. I wish they did a little bit more with her, but I can kind of understand why they didn't.
Yeah, and even her last scene, like when she's, she's literally on her deathbed, and like the scene where she's like, "Take off your mask because I want to see my nephew." Like, I think that was just like a really emotional, like surprising, touching moment. Like the fact that she knew, and I think like they hinted at it a little bit that she knew because like there was the scene, there was like one of those scenes I remember where like I was swinging through New York and he was calling her and she was like, "Oh, what? You're late again?" Like that's like because he always uses that excuse with her, so I think she was kind of onto him. Like I think it was. Even though she didn't get a ton to do, I think the way that they had her relationship, develop between them was really touching.
Yeah, and even though like Steven did say she was probably the most predictable death, like that her death scene is probably one of the more iconic Spider-Man scenes in recent memory, I'd have to say, just because like it kind of it goes through that like with great power comes great responsibility, how like he could help thousands or he could help the woman he loves, but his moral compass that she helped establish in him was there enough to where he chose to save everybody.
It was still an affecting.
And then that shot, like I was a bit shocked that I was like, they're not going to kill her, because like I mean, even if she was the most predictable, like I still wasn't expecting them to kill her. So like when you see her cough up blood, I'm just kind of like, oh, they're just teasing that. Yeah. And then when she actually dies, I was just kind of sitting there.
She's fake.
Yeah.
Wake up now. Wake up in.
Yeah. So before we move on to the villains, another character really quick that we hear but we don't actually see is J. Jonah Jameson, who obviously is a big role in the games. And there's been a lot of conversation about J. Jonah Jameson because of the sort of parallels. Yeah, because a lot of people have compared him to like Alex Jones and a lot of like conspiracy theorist type things. But what do you guys think about how they incorporated J. Jonah Jameson? Because like I thought it was interesting that like you only really get to hear him and not see him in game.
I that piece of the game, I don't know about you guys. Tomas might be too young, which is making me feel really old. But I think of like GTA 4, and that's when they really got crazy with the post 9/11 radio stations. And like those radio stations were amazing. Like GTA 4 had probably the best music, and its expansion had like a really amazing music when it was in Liberty City. But like listening to the talk radio in that game is beyond brilliant. And that's what I was like, wow, this is really good stuff. And I mean the Alex Jones comparisons are there, but it really reminded me of those radio stations in that game, and I was like, wow, this is on point.
You do look at his character, and I mean, J. Jonah Jameson has always kind of been like that. I just think because he was kind of a newspaper editor, people never really like pursued that.
Like
But then
tabloid.
especially in like today's modern culture where there's people like Alex Jones that exist and have an audience. Like
Yeah.
I think that the writers were smart enough to notice that they were like, oh, that's J. Jonah Jameson,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
they do put jabs at Alex Jones with like a couple chemtrail comments and stuff like that. So I just I'm I understand why they gave you the option to turn it off, but like I never did because it was
Oh no.
just really enjoyable to hear everything he had to
There's
say.
like
And then there's some funnier stuff in there too, where like Scorpion's suing him because he's the one who like got him to attack Spider-Man. Like, so yeah, no, they were able to sneak some like really funny stuff in.
Yeah.
And then you had the contextual stuff happening like post mission, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kind of give you an update like as to what you just did or what like the public perception is of what just happened in the city, and you were a part of it. And I don't know, I think it was great.
Yeah, because when you're doing missions as Spider-Man, he'll comment and be like, "Oh, I wonder what Jay's gonna say about me now that I'm doing this thing." And then, like, after you finish the mission, it'll be like a little bit of time, and then J. Jonah Jameson will pop up and be like, "Well, he was fucking swinging through pollution. What the hell is he doing?" It was really great. He's no J.K. Simmons, but he's still really good.
He's getting high off smog. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was so
dumb. Those were funny because for some reason none of those radio broadcasts popped up until the post game for me. So we talked about something I did like 5 hours ago, which was kind of funny. But yeah, no, they were really funny, well written, true to his character. Yeah. Peter's reaction, like I said, it's one of those things that makes the world feel lived in, where he's like, "Oh, I couldn't take Jonah, like making fun of me in the Daily Bugle anymore," and so that's one of the reasons he left. And then you also see the thing where he's like, "Oh yeah, I was one of the first people Jonah told about this new show, but I didn't think it was going to be successful." So that's kind of that thing with like, I don't want to get too political, where people are like, "Oh, Alex Jones will never actually have an audience," and then he has an audience. Yeah. So it was just kind of funny, and it gave the world more depth and history.
Yeah. So let's move on now because there's a lot of them. So we'll go into the villains. Just quickly go through them. So I would say like the two most prominent ones throughout the game are Mr. Negative and Otto Octavius, which they have some interesting parallels. So let's start with Otto Octavius, I think, because he actually, I think, out of all the villains, has like sort of the biggest depth and dimension to him.
Yeah, it's weird because like as soon as you see his name pop up, you're like, oh, he's gonna turn into Dr. Octopus by the end of this. Like just. I'm basically waiting for him to turn evil, and I think they handle it well. Because I knew he was going to turn, I never cared for him, because it's just like, I know you're going to turn bad. Like, I'm just waiting for it to happen. So I don't care that you're, like, I don't know. It was weird, because like, I like that him and Peter are working together to like try and do this prosthetic thing. They're having trouble with it. They're like having a kind of like a back and forth. They kind of hint at like Otto's rage, like that kind of like quick to anger sort of thing happens like a few times before he like finally gives into it fully. But I just felt like they were just so like, oh, here's Otto, like, what's gonna happen, we're gonna do it eventually, and I'm just like, okay, because I'm waiting for it the entire game. When it finally happens, I'm
hey,
like,
Steve,
right,
you want to help me with these tentacles I'm building?
It's like it was so with Mr. Negative too, it's like so heavy-handed, because every time you do a mission related to Mr. Negative, Peter always is like, I can't believe like Martin Lee was like a bad guy, and it's like, dude, I get it, like I understand what you're trying to say, like you don't have to be so heavy-handed with this.
I think I understand those. I think those are things they really couldn't help, and like I have a couple problems with the Martin Lee storyline, but like I think actually, I mean, besides the fact that you obviously know he's going to be like Doc Ock, like I did a really great job establishing their relationship and Peter really kind of feeling bad. And I think that final scene once he defeats him, and like once he nearly kills Spider-Man, and then they're in their final fight and he reveals that he knew it was Peter, and then that's just such a betrayal for him, because even if you don't really buy that he's good, like he was Peter's like mentor and who he looked up to, and so when he kind of sees like that, oh, he like betrayed me that heavily, and then he gives him like that skewed with great power comes great responsibility speech from like a more evil perspective in the final scene. I just thought that was really powerful, and they make you, even if you know what the end point's going to be, like I feel like they did put as much effort as they could into like making the the journey getting there enticing.
Yeah, and I think with Dr. Octopus and like out of all the villains in the game, like he was really, probably my favorite of all the ones that were in the game. Like I think the way that they sort of had his character develop, and it reminded me a lot, and I'm sure intentionally, of the dynamic in Spider-Man 2, the movie, where it was like, Otto Octavius was a sort of mentor and sort of almost father figure to Spider-Man. So I think that out of all the villains, like his story was really the one I think that landed the best for me. Whereas Mr. Negative, I didn't quite. I think it was. I appreciated that they like tried to include a lesser known character and sort of give him the spotlight in the game, but I just didn't really find his story as interesting or as involving. Like I know that they tried to do the whole thing where it was like, oh, he was experimented on as a kid, and he lost his parents, stuff like that. But I think it just came too little, too late, especially because of like the rest of the game. He just came off as kind of a generic bad guy, like without really a huge emotional connection.
Yeah, the pacing in his arc I think was a bit off because I think they spent too much time just going like, oh, why is Martin Lee evil? Oh, like you know what I mean? Like they kind of were just kind of like, oh, why is he doing what he's doing for too long? And so that kind of got old. And then I mean the end result's fairly like predictable.
Yeah, because
so
I feel like most of his character development really doesn't come in until like the third act of the game. Like because really Act 2 is kind of where he comes in, or Act 1, or
I almost wish he didn't leave Feast like right at the start of the game. I think like if they had kept him there, like that would have made it a little more interesting. But yeah. So I mean, his arc. Yeah, that's my one problem with the story. I think it's like basically once the like I think Marl's dad dies, the game picks up, and then especially once the rap happens, like the game's nonstop. But I feel like for the first half, it's very slow, and they kind of pose questions the answers to, so it isn't as enticing.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time hunting down Mr. Negative in the game.
I know I was going to jump in and talk about the Otto Octavius Osborn connection. When you're in Osborn's apartment, which is by the way the nicest rich guy apartment in Manhattan. Can we just talk about that apartment? I mean, let's talk about whoever his designer is. Like I was looking around that apartment, I was like, "This shit is nice."
That is too big.
It's too much apartment for me. I don't want this. Is way too much apartment for me. But there's a picture in Osborn's bedroom, and I look at it, and I see, honestly, the story of Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn is actually the untold tale of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
Basically, yeah. It's like
because that's like the parallel that I had pulled. Like you had like the genius, and then you had the fate company, and like they're falling out and everything that happened along the way.
When I got to that section, that was kind of what I drew to, was that it was like, oh, they're kind of going for like a Steve Jobs and Wozniak type of connection here, but
like the dynamic that they had. But as soon as I saw that picture, I was like, yep, that's what's happening here. I get it now. It all makes sense.
I was surprised they didn't turn Osborn into Green Goblin in this game.
Yeah, I don't think they will. Like, I mean, I see. They tease the suit and everything.
Yeah.
But I actually think that's more likely to be Harry than anybody. I mean, we'll probably get that later.
Yeah.
I was just surprised because you see Osborn show up. He's going to become Green Goblin.
I think it's just because because Green Goblin's just been shown so many times in like the movies and stuff like that, and I think it just would have been like I appreciated that like they kind of went for like a character like Mr. Negative that was like a little lesser known and that people would have more of a chance to sort of explore.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and he's still a villain, like even he's not Green Goblin. Like, and I know, like if you look at the plot, you're just like, oh, why is Spider-Man helping Norman Osborn? But he's really not. But the game does point out where Spider-Man's like, oh no, I'm gonna go after him next, kind of thing. But it's just like I think they did a decent job. I'm glad he wasn't the main villain because like I think that would have been more generic than what they did with like Otto Octavius.
And speaking of these villains, was anybody else concerned? Like for 1 second after like the raft, I was like, this shit's about to turn into Spider-Man 3, the movie. This is about to get really bad. This is turning into a train wreck, and I got a little nervous. But then when I saw that like the fights, they started pairing them off.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, thank God. But for a second I was like, wait a minute, like at what point is this too much? Like this is getting kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I think part of that's too because they held them all until the third act. I feel like at that point it would have been I was a little disappointed you didn't have individual ones with everybody, but But I feel like I was kind of smart pairing them up at that point in the story because I feel like if you were going to do single boss fights like they did with Shocker, you would
Yeah.
have had to introduce them a little earlier on. But I
Right.
also
Yeah.
think that makes the third act really succinct and like it just really enjoyable because then as soon as they all break out, you're like fighting all of like the greatest hits of his villains.
Yeah.
So it's like
It's less,
it,
it's less that their characters, more like they're just super powered thugs that you have to go
yeah.
fight.
Because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I love the Electro and Vulture fight. It was probably my favorite boss fight in the game.
That
like
one
that
was
one just-
that one was great. That was
that-
one of
that was-
my favorites.
Yeah,
And
'cause
Yeah, I took a bunch of pictures during that one. That was great.
Yeah, like I could take both of them like individually. I think they both would have been really solid boss fights, but then in addition, I think pairing them up created a really interesting dynamic where you're like trying to shut down his Electro's generators or whatever, and then you're also like webbing Vulture and attacking him. Whereas I feel like Ryan and Scorpion like they didn't mesh as well. Like I feel like those could have been two separate fights.
yeah,
But,
that one was okay. I wasn't as I definitely like this the Vulture and Electro fight over that one. And I think my least favorite fight in general was that Shocker fight. The Shocker fight I just wasn't really a huge fan of. It was alright.
It stands out too because like I mean I wasn't really disappointed, but that's the only boss fight like that in the game. Like I thought they'd kind of lean into the like villain boss fight a bit more.
Yeah.
It was interesting that they didn't, but yeah. So I think it kind of stands out as kind of like because I mean it's fine, but it's like it's nothing grand, and it's the only one like that in the game.
Yeah, the Taskmaster fights I thought were really fun too. I really enjoyed those fights.
They got
Question, are you
they're
supposed to beat him? Because he beat the shit out of me.
No, you're supposed to beat
you,
them.
you can beat it.
Okay, 'cause I'm gonna go back for him. But
Joel's just
I was
Joel's just bad at Spider-Man.
I was like, am I supposed to beat him? Because he just kicked the shit out of me like really quickly. I was like, level 38 at that point. I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah, you fight him.
I'm gonna go back for him.
You fight him once when you're like midway through the challenges that he set up, and you beat him, and then he like escapes, and then you finish the challenges, and then he comes back again. You beat him, and he still escapes. But there's like two fights with him, which are they're fun. They reminded me of the Deathstroke fight in Batman Arkham Origins or whatever, because it's like, oh, here's this guy who like he is a lot like Deathstroke, where it's like, oh, he has all of your moves, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was still a lot of fun to fight him.
That side quest I wasn't huge on like the story with Taskmaster, but they were cool fights.
Oh,
Yeah.
and how the Avengers are on the West Coast, even though like New York
Yeah.
City.
Oh, yeah, that was-
Yeah.
Is that a
fucking siege.
was
Like
that a-
nobody shows up.
was that a jab at Crystal Dynamics working on the Avengers because they're on the West Coast?
Maybe,
No,
I
I think
don't
that was
know.
just-
Like, I think that's
Yeah.
fun.
I think that was more.
I
That
don't
was
know.
more like they couldn't get the hero. Like it doesn't make
Oh, yeah.
sense to have a Spider-Man story that has like
Mhm.
this huge thing, and to have the Avengers be present but not able to
Oh,
help
yeah.
out or like appear because like
Mhm.
I like how Spider-Man is like he's a great character by himself, but he also is really really good when he's with other superheroes and doing things with other superheroes. So for them to not have that was like a little disappointing, but it's fine because it's supposed to be focused on him.
Oh,
I do hope
yeah.
for when they make a sequel, I hope there are like cameos because like they have like a Daredevil. Oh, he's got like the Matt Murdock like business card, and it's like, oh, the dude like he knew I was Spider-Man. Like, how did you know that?
yeah.
Where were the defenders during this New York thing? Was my only question because they established that all of them are there.
Right, yeah, because they had Alias Investigations was in there
Oh,
as a
yeah.
landmark and
And
stuff
Rand
like that.
Corporation.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I think we pretty much hit all the characters now. So let's just kind of go into the story. And I know we've sort of touched on most of the story elements here, but so we'll just kind of look at an overview of the story as a whole. So what did you guys think about the story of Marvel Spider-Man and sort of how Insomniac kind of incorporated a lot of different things from comics and movies and other depictions of the character, but also sort of made it feel like its own original take on Spider-Man?
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
I wasn't like I liked like I enjoyed the game. I like it. It's a solid game. I was not in love with it, mostly because it was just like I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on it, but it was just like I was like playing through it, and I'm like playing through it in the weekend, and I'm really enjoying it. It's not like the pacing is like slowing me down. It's not like the characters are bad, but it just feels like there just wasn't something there that like made me like love it. Like I really enjoyed it. Like it's a good Spider-Man story. It's a good Spider-Man game. It has that sort of like he's always looking for the best in people. He like very easily asked Mary Jane or Aunt May or something at some point, like being like like how far do you go for a friend? Like how many like chances do you give that person? Like that sort of thing. And it's like, oh, like that's a good that's like a great like Spider-Man thematic thing is like being the best you can, using as much of your abilities as you can to help other people, whether it's in Feast or as Spider-Man cleaning up the city and stopping these people from hurting other people. I don't know. There's like certain things that I feel like were a little bit pushed too far as far as the villains, because it's like he's like talking with Martin Lee, being like, "You are like going to kill half the city simply to get at Osborn. Are you thinking this through at all?" And it's like the same thing with Dr. Octopus, where it's like he just hates Osborn, and so what does he do? He kidnaps the city and like holds it hostage and then throws him off a building. And it's just like, what are you doing? Like, didn't you want to kill him?
Yeah, Doc Ock's plan was a little weak. Like, I mean, I understand it was weak in how he was going to kill Osborn, where he's just like, "Oh, I'm going to toss him off a building," and it's like, oh, you think tossing someone off a building will work in a city where Spider-Man is the main
because like I really like Spider-Man and Mary Jane. I really like him bringing up Morales as like his new successor. I really like the scene of him losing Aunt May is very good. It's very much like you feel for the character. You feel that he is really disappointed and really hurt by Dr. Octavius turning evil and having to like fight him and basically doom him to live in that body that's breaking down. Like, that is sad. I don't know. It just really affected me as much as I was hoping it would.
I think I understand where you're coming from, but I think I liked it a bit more than you did. Like, there are pacing problems. I think like they did spend a little too much time at going like, "Ooh, who's Mr. Negative?" But like, I just, especially that last third, I think was nearly perfect in a lot of ways. Like, except for like him just throwing Osborn off of the building, being how he was going to kill him. But like, that was really solid. I think you got a lot of great character moments, a lot of great character interactions. It just showed how well they understood the world. That final boss fight with Doc Ock was really cool, even if it was a bit easy. And then just like the fact when you beat him and they're talking, and then Peter feels really betrayed because like the man he respected and looked up to nearly killed him and isn't batting an eye because he hates Osborn so much.
Yeah.
And then he kind of says, like, he gives him that, like, with great power comes great responsibility speech, but he says, like, "Oh yeah, we need to help those beneath us." And that kind of shows the difference between him and Dr. Octopus, where like he's more like, I don't want to say emotional, but like he looks at himself as a bit more like a superior Spider-Man. Okay, but that was a reference. But he kind of sees himself as like a superior person, and then whereas Peter's more like, "No, I need to help these people because like I'm a person too, and I need to love them." So that just did a great job at showing his character and Doc Ock's, and like really, because I mean, all of Spider-Man's villains reflect them in some way, and I think that like this game did a good job at demonstrating that with all of them. And then leading right from that scene into Aunt May's death, which I already talked about like extensively in this podcast, but it's just, that was a great moment too, and I just feel like that like 1-2 punch with both of those scenes really like made me kind of forgive some of the other pacing problems, because those were just scenes that were so true to his character and so good.
Yeah, and I think as we sort of touched on before, like the way that we said that the game kind of feels in a lot of ways like a greatest hits of Spider-Man, which I think is like in the game's case a good thing, because it's like, even though it does contain a lot of familiar elements from previous depictions of Spider-Man games, I think the way that Insomniac kind of blended them together felt really good, and sort of how it touched on like the villains and sort of the dynamics between the different characters. But there was enough there that I think, especially in terms of the story and sort of how they fleshed out Peter as a as a character, really made me invested in the story way more than I originally thought that I was going to. So I really enjoyed it, and I think I loved especially the way that the story was paced, that even though it's like a big open world game where there's a lot of side stuff to do and things like that, as far as the main story, like I felt like that the pacing of it was pretty much perfect. Like there were only a few instances where I feel like the story maybe dragged a little bit, but otherwise like the game really kept me sort of invested throughout. I'd say the main story takes about like, I don't know, 10-15 hours, somewhere around there. So it's like it's like it's
funny, like, but I was doing side stuff. Like I think if you go straight through the story, it's probably about 10.
Yeah, I think, which is good. I think for the story that length, I wouldn't have wanted to do a 40-hour to 60-hour Spider-Man story. I think that's just way too much. So.
Oh no, too many games now are way too long.
Absolutely.
And I was very thankful that Spider-Man was like it was not too long. It very much was like, there are like some sections that kind of drag on for a little bit for me, but like it was definitely like overall it was like, oh, I'm glad that they did not make this into like a fucking 3-hour
Yeah, no,
open world
I think that would have
like,
been overkill if they dragged it out for that long.
oh yeah.
So I think with that said, let's sort of jump to the ending now and just sort of discuss what we thought about the sort of final, final act of the game and sort of where the story leaves off. And we can include we'll go into the post credit scenes as well for those listening.
Yeah, so like I mean, it ends with the mid-credit scene is where him and Miles are talking, and it's a fun scene because Miles, you know what Miles is trying to say, but the way he's going about it is very much like
that was that was a great scene. I love like he's saying like, oh, he's like changing physically and like he can't tell his mom, and Peter just assumes he's talking about like puberty and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's like, well,
yeah.
your body is changing because you're getting older, blah blah blah. But then it like it just the way they played it out was really funny.
Yeah, the part where like Miles turns around and is like, it's probably better if I show you, and Peter's like, oh.
He looks like he's gonna take off his shirt, like.
And then he just jumps on the ceiling, and then Peter jumps on the ceiling, and he's like, "Ah, I'm just like you." And it's just like, "Oh, that's a nice like, oh, okay, like we're setting it up to Peter become his like sort of mentor in the future."
And I think it was expected that like they would end with Miles sort of becoming Spider-Man, but I think the way that they did that sort of reveal for the character was great.
Yeah, because I mean, you have the part where the spider jumps on MJ, and I'm like, as soon as I see that, I'm like, oh, that's gonna go bite Miles. They're gonna go Miles.
I actually thought it was gonna bite MJ at first, and like
really?
that'd be interesting. Yeah,
that would have been interesting.
Yeah, like an interesting twist where like I know she's not Gwen Stacy, so they couldn't do Spider Gwen, but like maybe I don't know, she becomes Spider Girl or something like that.
Yeah,
there's Spider Girl and Spider Woman. They could have gone that route. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think they really wanted to, because you look at how kind of independent as a journalist they kind of made her in the game. I don't really think that would have been as great for her.
Because you can't kill MJ, because then that would justify Peter's treating her like a glass object, which they were very much against with her character throughout the game, which was like pushing against that, being like, no, I'm going to do this, and like stop treating me like I'm gonna die at any second.
Yeah.
And then they couldn't turn her into Spider-Woman, I guess, because again it would be like, oh well, now Peter's going to let her do whatever she wants because she's just like him. And,
right. Yeah.
So, but oh, and then the final scene, of course, is where Osborn goes into the secret room that MJ went into, and he reveals that Harry Osborn is in there, and he's like got like this weird. Is it webbing? Is it the symbiote?
I think it.
What is it?
Symbiote. I'd say symbiote.
Because it was black and it was like moving on its own.
There's stuff in the comics where he was like kind of in the symbiote and also the Green Goblin, so I think that's what they're going for.
It was weird. I mean, like it was obvious because like when you're going through the section and MJ finds out that like Harry's Europe trip was all a sham. It's like, okay, like so is Harry dead or is he in a like tube somewhere just like chilling?
I think. I did like sort of the ambiguity of that final post credit scene, because like they had the green tank, and I was like, okay, so they're starting to tease Green Goblin, and either Norman or Harry will become him. But then like the thing with the black stuff around him, I was like, oh, is Harry going to become Venom? Like that's really kind of the direction that I felt they were going in.
But isn't that a completely different offshoot? Because doesn't like the original story, and I'm going by the comic and both the animated series from the '90s, which is the best ever. Wasn't it J. Jonah Jameson's son, who is an astronaut?
Yes.
Goes up to space.
And that was in Spider-Man 3, right? That was who?
No, it was an asteroid.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
the character, like
J. Jonah Jameson's son, that was different. He turned into like a werewolf thing. He got it in a yeah, I know that's.
But he brought the symbiote back.
Yeah, but then I also think in Secret Wars, which was like a crossover event, Spider-Man found the suit and brought it back. And then it turned out to be an evil alien life form. And I'm not going to turn this into a comics chat, but they've done some really interesting stuff with the symbiote recently. I'm wondering if they're going to pull from that.
And I guess my concern is like, I feel like this game did so much towards the ending, like you said, like that third act just gets insane. But like we literally had a terrorist chemical bioterror attack like in this game. So, because if we're going to go to where it goes next, right, because that's where we're kind of figuring out, right, post-credit scene and where we go from here, how over the top can it really get at this point? And then, and how do you keep it just a Spider-Man game? Because if things get crazy enough, they have all these Easter eggs with all these other characters clearly existing in the MCU. I don't know. It's like we got Miles to play backup, but it's like where do they go from here?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the
So
next
actually, let's
game.
before we let's just we could transition now sort of into where do you guys if you see this as sort of the beginning of a new franchise for Sony and Insomniac, where do you think they go from here for the next game and as far as the story and everything?
Yeah, I feel like they should definitely set it up, or I feel like they went into it thinking it's going to be a trilogy. Obviously, it sold well and got rave reviews from everyone, so everyone loves it. They definitely will probably make another one. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. I feel like with the next one, I don't know. I feel like they would just make it more personal, where it's like, okay, Harry is in trouble, and he either becomes a Green Goblin or Venom. Who knows what they're going to do with that, or as far as
Right,
like
yeah.
trying to separate it or combine it in some way, maybe. And then, of course, you have Miles Morales kind of coming up, and I feel like the second game would be great to kill Spider-Man midway through somehow, and then have Miles take over because
Right,
then that would be a great setup for the third.
They'll John Marston him in
Yeah, I just really want them to do something crazy or like unexpected. And I mean, like now that Miles is in there, now that he's going to become like the kind of like Spider-Man protege, it is kind of expected to kill Peter. But I still think it would be great if they do that in the next one, is like kill Peter midway through or at some point, and kind of like have Miles pick up the slack and become the new Spider-Man.
I mean, they can even go with like this whole. I mean, look at how well God of War presented kind of like a story of like a father and son, and like the master and the protege kind of thing. Let me mute that. They can even kind of do flashbacks and tell us like what happened in those 8 years as he's explaining the story to Miles. And he's like, oh, this one time, that I fought Electro, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, kind of like building up to that, but then, then take on a bigger foe in Harry, or maybe they are teasing the symbiote, however the hell you pronounce that.
As Joel's talking about this, all I'm imagining is Peter Parker with a beard calling him Miles Boy, and just
just like, this is how you wait boy. I mean, the thing is too, it's like I everyone's chiming in. It's like, oh, Insomniac should make all these Marvel games. I can't wait, and it's like, no, let's not go down that path either, because I think that they've got enough story here to tell. I just my concern is, like I said, with the way that thing got towards the end, with like literally a bioterror attack on New York City, like how do you up the ante from there, and how do you go any higher without getting other characters in the MCU involved? And maybe that is how they can work on other characters without working on other games, and maybe we will get those cool kind of cameos or sequences where the help does come in.
Yeah,
if it goes over the top.
They pull an Empire Strikes Back, and they just make it like a very personal thing for Spider-Man and Miles. They're dealing with very personal sort of conflicts that are important to them, maybe not important to the city, but are very important to them personally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I also hope that we get more villains, because like I said, like they gained my respect by being surprisingly reserved with the villains in this game, but I think now that they've kind of established anything, I want to see some new ones, like hopefully like Sandman, Lizard, Mysterio. Like I don't know if they'll want to repeat.
I love Mysterio.
I don't know if they'll repeat villains in the second game, but
I think they should. They should bring some of them back. Mm-hmm.
But Craven, Big Wheel, Stiltman, but
Chameleon.
Chameleon, there's just, I mean, we could go on for like an hour listing all of his villains, but there's a lot to pull from, and this game didn't, which makes me think that they're kind of and even the tie-in books and stuff didn't really like use too many important characters either, so it makes me think that like definitely in the sequel or stuff they're gonna keep on like taking out the big names, or like doing an origin story for another character.
And I mean, we also have the DLC coming that I guess is going to incorporate Black Cat. So it'll be interesting to see, sort of what. Actually,
I didn't like her side quest in this game. It felt very like by the DLC.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It was like
the ending of it.
It was just kind of very like, oh, see the rest of this play out in the DLC that's going to be coming, I guess, next month or pretty soon. So we'll I mean, it'll be interesting to see her as a character be incorporated, even though she didn't really get a ton to do in this game. So I think with that, that's pretty much everything we had in the agenda to talk about. Do you guys have any sort of final thoughts you want to just say quickly about the game?
One quick thing, and I mentioned this because Steve said it earlier in terms of chasing after his plat. I never ever have been the completionist.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only game in a very long time that has me like, no, we're gonna get every goddamn trophy in this.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be probably doing the same thing because like I finished the main story, but I'm going to go back and do all like the side stuff and all the things. I think it's because it's a relatively not super challenging platinum, so that is part of it because it's not like super demanding. It's basically if you 100% the game, you'll get the platinum for it, which is cool.
Yeah. So
Right.
the open world never gets old, but it is a Ubisoft open world where it is, fucking icons everywhere.
Yeah, I think one thing I appreciated about that though that I liked is that they gradually rolled out the different collectibles and things over the course of the game rather than just overwhelm you with like here's a ton of shit to do. Like, so I think I appreciated that because it was like in the beginning it was like, oh, here are the backpacks, you can get all those, and that's like, okay, now you can go get the Black Cat collectibles and things like that. So
they dished it out well. It was just very much like, we're doing this again. It's another open world game.
And I think that's part of like why I liked the game so much was the fact that like even though it did have that sort of Ubisoft style open world where it was just like a map full of icons and stuff, like I think everything else around the game and sort of how they incorporated it like was so well polished and well done that it made me overlook that sort of traditional structure that we've seen from a lot of open world games.
Yeah, they made it fun.
Yeah. Tomas, do you have anything?
Like I said earlier, it was like it's one of the few games I've been able to like just lose myself in and not even notice like the time that's passed. It's really great. Like, I mean, it's not a flawless game. It does actually have some like noticeable problems which we've kind of touched on in this podcast, but it's one of the most enjoyable times I've had with the game like in the past few years. And so I definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Spider-Man and you somehow haven't picked it up yet. Like, I definitely recommend getting it.
Also, you shouldn't be listening to this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, at this point, it's like.
Yeah. All right. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap up. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll probably come back, I'm sure, for another big game. I imagine Red Dead's got to be the next one that we'll probably all want to be doing a spoiler cast on in the coming month when that comes out. But really quickly before you go, if you guys want to read more about Spider-Man, you can obviously read our full review, which we gave the game a 10, which is a very high honor because not a lot of games get that from us. You can also read, we have a bunch of editorials and stuff about the game. Like Giuseppe did a really good piece about swinging in Spider-Man. We also have a tips post about, tips that can help you get through the game. Logan just did an editorial about the art book for the game that has some really cool insight from the developers. And then Tomas also did a while back an evolution of Spider-Man and gaming piece. So if you want to compare the previous Spider-Man games to Insomniac's Marvel Spider-Man, you could read about that and sort of see the good and bad Spider-Man games that there have been, because there have been plenty of good ones, but also some not very good ones. So with that, we'll close out here. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you around for the next Spoilercast.